This is a Sundown Audio Team Ferrite motor, and it's also going to be our Tech Stuff Tuesday. This week, I'm going to build a sub that Sundown Audio doesn't make with their own motor, a 10-inch version. I had a customer who very specifically requested building some of these, so I'm going to be building two of them for him. He wanted them to replace his ZV5s. He wanted to take more power, so I'm building these using parts that are not available to just bolt right on. As a result of, they don't make this in a 10-inch, so I have to modify some parts to make this work. But I'm going to show you the entire assembly process from start to finish on this entire sub. So the first thing that we're going to do from just the motor is the spacer. So now I got the spacer lined up. The next thing will be the basket. It's also referred to as a frame, depending who you're talking to. We have M6 bolts. So now that we've got the basket bolted to the motor, which you'll notice there's a bit of a mounting issue. The motor actually is wider than the cutout for the basket. The customer is aware of this, so it has to be inverted or make a plate that would be in two parts that would bolt to that and then go in. It's all fiasco. That's what I like to call not a me problem. It's what he requested. I warned him. He's fine with it. So next we have to go to the spider and coil. This is our coil. It's a 4-inch diameter coil. This is 100 millimeters. This is 50 millimeters. Top blade is 50 millimeters. And we have to get this coil centered in the middle of this top plate. I've already gone and measured this out, but you'd have 50 millimeters being the middle of the coil. Let's see if you can see my mark. That is my mark. Now the way that I got there, this is half the coil. This has to be halfway between here and here. This is 50 millimeters, so half of that is 25. So I took my half, went up 25 millimeters, and when I go to put this coil in, I'm going to look for that mark at the top of the top plate when I go to set it in. Then we have the spider. This spider won't fit because it's a 3-inch coil spider. So we have to cut this out to fit our 4-inch coil. So here I've flipped the spider upside down. We've got our coil right here, and this is the size that needs to be cut out. So what I'm going to do is flip this coil over, get as close as I can to centering it up on this spider, and then I'm going to mark it so we know where we need to cut with the razor. My mark is a little bit hard to see because I use a gold marker. I recommend using a darker one, but this is what I've got right here. So you want to make sure that you cut to the inside edge of this mark. If you go too small, you can always make it bigger. If you cut out too big, you have to get another spider. So we're going to cut this using a utility knife. You want to make sure you don't actually cut through the leads when you're doing this from the back side. So make sure you go light with that. And what I am going to do is, these leads are secured right on here, so I'm going to cut these loose to pull them back. Okay, so now I've got this cut out. I think it might be just a little bit too small. It is quite tight. So there's a little bit more I've got to trim out here. And one way that you can do this with a rasping bit. So now that we've got this at a very tight fit, it's very, very snug through here, we're going to put the triple joint ring on here. The leads come up. Now this triple joint ring is not on every sub. This is something that Sundown Audio does. This is something that we do. Not everybody does it. And we can put spider on. So now we're to the point that we can try to drop this in and get everything lined up accordingly, and then we can start the gluing process. So we've got our triple joint ring, our spider, and our coil ready to be lined up in this motor, but we have to shim it. So what I'm going to use is 7 sheets of paper. Yeah, just paper. You don't have to have anything fancy. 4-inch coils, you have to do it long ways, but I just put it right up here in the coil and then slide it on the motor. You'll make sure there's a very, very snug fit, so if you try to move it like this with the coil down there, it shouldn't move. It should be very, very as close as you can get to not being able to pull it out, but you still don't want too much. You have to jam it in there. So in this particular case, it happens to be 7 sheets of paper. It will vary based on your paper weight, but in this case, it's 7 pieces of paper. So this will be shimmed correctly. What we can do is find our line that we drew on the coil here, right there. And I'm going to have to look through this hole with a flashlight to find where this is going to line up. And basically you want to look through the hole, line up that line with the top of the top plate. So now we've got this lined up, and this is very, very snug because we made sure that the spiders were very snug on the former. Now we're using CA glue for this. You do not want to use epoxy or Gorilla Glue or anything like that. You do want to use a rubberized CA glue. And what I'm going to do is get a little bit right here on the top just to make sure it stays in place. This one's very, very snug, so it shouldn't be a problem, but I do want to get a little bit of a bead just to make sure everything holds in place while we move the rest of this around. So now that we've got the spider mated to the coil, we've got the cone. So what we're going to have to do is, this is a 3-inch cone, we've got a 4-inch coil. So we've got to cut this out in the same way that we did the spider. We're going to set the cone down, we're going to take our coil, and you could actually have done this beforehand, but we're going to set this on top, make sure it's centered up, mark it, and cut it out. So now that we've got the cone marked up, we're going to do the same thing with the razor. Make sure you use a sharp razor blade. So now we've got this cut loose, and we can do a test fit. Now I didn't cut out far enough on this, so we're going to have to make this slightly larger. I've actually got a fair amount that I cut this short because I didn't want to go too large with it. But we can fix this with a screwdriver. You just want to ream it right around the edge. This gives it just a little bit of a bore when you put some pressure on it. It'll bring this down, it'll flatten this inside edge out. So now we've got our cone cut out to the appropriate size to fit over this former. We have to mate these two together and make sure everything lines up right. So what I have done here, you don't have to do it, but it helps. I put masking tape over the top of the leads. Make sure your leads off the coil are up here and your leads off the spider. If you tape those down, that makes it a little bit easier to get the cone on when you go through here. So we take our shims from earlier, put those in the coil again, put this in here, and make sure that your leads are lined up where they're going to go on the basket. Because on this particular cone, we've got notches where they go in the basket. So from here, I want to make sure we don't have anything getting in the way, and we put the cone and if you did this right, it should be a very tight fit. So now we've got the cone on top of here, everything is lined up, everything is good. We will have to cut this former. It is definitely too tall for this application. There's two ways you can go about doing it. One would be take the cone back off after marking kind of where you need to do it. Or the way that I will do it, just because I do it this way sometimes. I'm going to glue this in place and then I'm going to cut it. Cutting it beforehand is probably going to be a little bit easier, but you can do it either way. I know I can freehand it if everything's assembled and cut it that way, but either way you want to do that is up to you. So at this point now, you've got to get these leads from the spider connected to this lead on the coil. And the way that we're going to do that is wrapping one around the other. Next, we're on to soldering. So we've got to get all these soldered now that they're wrapped around. You do want to use a very good soldering station, if at all possible. You want to be over 600 degrees, but we're going to get these soldered up. So I've got everything soldered up. We're going to glue in this joint, again using CA glue. So now that we've got the top glued in, we've also got to get the triple joint glued in, because we don't want this to come apart down here. It is secure up top, but we don't want this to come apart. This will give us a better glue joint at the spider and at the cone as well. And then we still have the bottom, and this ring will slide on top of that, and we'll glue that in as well. So we're going to do that next. Now with the top joint done, we'll go to the bottom. The easiest way that I found to do this is to invert it on the sub like so. And it can make a nice smooth bead around the top. And now we've got a completed drop-in. So from here we can put the terminals on the basket and then actually secure this to the basket. These are the speaker terminal blocks that Sundown Audio uses. These are not ones that I use at all, but they did tool these specifically for this basket. It says Sundown Audio right there. But this just uses an 8mm nut that goes on top of this. It will sit right up inside the basket here. We bolt this on, and then our leads actually get a ring put onto those, and then those will bolt into that. So let's get that done. Something also worth noting, positive will always be on the left. Off camera I went ahead and soldered and crimped these connectors on to go in there. I also went ahead and trimmed the former. Now this is kind of rough. Turns out on the 10-inch cones, I'd never done one of these before. It's kind of difficult to get a good straight line there on these because you have to go at a weird angle. You can't just go straight across. So for the other ones, I will do that ahead of time now that I know exactly how much I've got to cut off. How straight that is doesn't really matter in terms of its performance, but it looks a little bit nicer. So the other ones I will do off, so this will come out straighter. But now we need to scuff the basket. So we will use sandpaper. We've got to scuff the spider landing as well as the surround landing. This is a 46 grit paper, I believe. So it does a very good job of getting the paint scuffed up. We want to make sure we have a little bit scuffed surface for the glue to adhere to, and we also got to make sure that all this is clean. So I'll get this cleaned up. You'll want to use a microfiber towel or something that's going to be lint free. You may also want to use alcohol. Now, this does not necessarily have to be down all the way to the metal. but it does have to not be a very smooth, shiny surface. So at this point, we can drop this in, which is why they call it a drop in. We'll have to put a bead of glue around where the spider is, but we don't want to do the surround just yet. If we do that, it will be much more difficult to get in to put the screws down into where the terminal blocks are here. So we're going to leave the surround loose for right now and only do the spider. Don't forget, you have the shim as well. Now, if you assembled this correctly, you shouldn't have to put any weight or any clamps or anything on the spider to go from the spider to the basket. That should sit right on there, and that should dry nicely. One thing that I am going to do for this purpose to kind of speed it up, I am going to put clamps on here so I can do the top. The reason for that is this will be moving around, and I don't want to pull any pressure off of here while I'm doing that. Now this surround is the SPL cone. It is a much smaller roll, but I can still fold it up and it stay right there. For these terminals, I've got the small screw and a lock washer, and that's what's going to go through the ring terminal. So again, these ring terminals on here are very, very tight. Having the SPL surround and being a 10, it's just very difficult to get in there, get it lined up, get that secured. But I've got all 4 of them in there, so now we have to get the surround secured to the basket. And for that, we're going to use E6000 black, specifically black. This is also made in white and clear. Clear takes a longer time to dry. It does not adhere as well. White I've never tried, but the black definitely works very well. So that's what we're going to use. You could also use an epoxy, 2-part epoxy in many of these cases. I have not tried it with this particular surround. Some surrounds, it sticks better than others, but this always works, so I always use it. You can get it at a lot of places locally, and it's not that expensive. What I have to do is run a bead right down the middle of the basket. You don't have to smear it out or anything. When we put the surround on here, it will smear it out for us. Now I've just got that set down, and from here we do want to clamp this. So we've got plenty of clamps. Now this is going to take about an hour to set up, so we're going to leave this for an hour. Then we'll take the shim out and put on the dust cap. I've taken all the clamps off the surround. Now this is dry. I went ahead and put the gasket on, and the only thing we have left to do in terms of assembly is putting on the dust cap. They requested the carbon fiber dust cap, so I'm doing that. I have scuffed the back side here because, again, we don't want just a perfectly smooth surface. We want it a little bit scuffed for it to bond to. If this were a plastic dust cap, I would still do the same thing. So now we can use the dust cap and cover up this kind of not great straight cut job that we've got going on here. The cone itself does have a ridge in here, so we know exactly where this goes in. There's two ways that we can apply the glue. We can either do it to the dust cap directly, or we can do it to the cone. Oftentimes, I will do it to the dust cap. This is one of those occasions when you have the ridge that you could do it on the cone. So I'm going to do it on the cone so you can actually see it being applied. Again, we're using E6000 for this. Now, one thing you don't want to do is take the glue all the way to the very edge. If you do, it'll pop out the sides and it won't look very good. So we're in just a little bit from the edge, and we don't have a logo on the dust cap, so we can just set it directly on. We don't have to worry about lining it up and making it straight or anything. I'm also going to give this a little bit of a twist to make sure we don't have any air bubbles and make sure everything is smeared evenly on there. And then we need weight. So this weight is going to sit here for about an hour. Once the dust cap has dried, this will be ready to put on the test bench and make sure that we don't have any pops or creaks or any weird noise or anything out, and make sure that everything works fine. And here we have our completed Sundown Audio Team 10-inch, the model that they don't make, but I'm making a few of these for a customer. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already subscribed, do that now. You can support us on Patreon in the link below. If you have any questions about this sub or any comments, comment that below and we'll answer those as quickly as we can. You can also shop for all Sundown Audio products, as well as EMF audio, audio control, excess power, and SBC on our website, www.emfcaraudio.com. And I'll see you again in another Tech Stuff Tuesday.